We have the pleasure to have here with us Branimir Jovanovic, the WIW's Western Balkan expert. And he will talk about an important issue that was discussed a lot in the context of the COVID crisis. The question whether there will be a shortening of the value chains, and hence we would like to know whether this nearshoring is really an option for the wider region in Central, East and Southeast Europe. But you have been doing recently more specific research also on the Western Balkans. So we would be very much interested to see details of this. And after your presentation of about 35 to 40 minutes, we will still have time for about 20 to 25 minutes of Q&A. So please, Branimir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mario, for the kind introduction, and thank you everybody else for joining this session. So let me just share my screen before I start talking. I'm not too good at multitasking, so I can't really talk and arrange everything. Okay, so can you see something now?
Yes, it's fine. Great.
Okay, great, thanks. So the title of my talk today is Getting Stronger After COVID, and nearshoring potential in Eastern Europe as a subtitle, let's say. I'm going to talk basically, most of the things that I'm going to talk will be based on a study which we are preparing, which we are working on, and which should come out in the next couple of weeks or something, which is a study on nearshoring potential in the Western Balkans specifically. But the main findings and much of the analysis in this study is general and refers also to most of the Eastern European countries, not just to Western Balkan countries. So that's why I'll try to be as general as possible today and speak about Eastern Europe as a whole, not specifically only for Western Balkans. Although in some part of the discussion, I will focus on the Western Balkans because of some specificities. So this study, like I said, should come out in the next couple of weeks. And it's a study which we have been working on for the last several months with several chambers, which are listed here. You can read them. I don't have to go through them, and some other partners. So it's a very collaborative effort. And the study has been financially supported by the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development of Germany. So what's the study about? One of the most, I would say, perverse, but also at the same time revealing and maybe revelating moments during this pandemic happened in the early stage of the pandemic, roughly 1 year ago, more than 1 year ago, when the world faced a shortage of some basic necessities like protection masks. So basically, we live in a world where we are sending people to Mars, or maybe not people, but missions to Mars. But at the same time, we can't provide enough, we can't manufacture enough small pieces of textile or whatever clothes, which we can put on our mouths to protect from, I don't know, viruses or something like that. So it's kind of a very perverse situation, but at the same time, very revealing because it illustrates some of the main weaknesses of the current economic, but not just economic, also social and political system that we're living in. And one of the, let's say, biggest trends in the global economy, in the world economy, in the last several decades, was the process of globalization of world production. So it was a process that was going on for several decades, 4 decades or something, some people say even more. And it was a process in which multinational companies were locating their production, their manufacturing abroad, out of their countries, mostly to countries which have cheap labor, which have lower wages than themselves, looking to minimize their production costs, basically to minimize labor costs. At the same time, in parallel with that, they were organizing their production in a just-in-time manner, which was originally the Japanese first started this kind of production, which means that you keep inventories to a minimum and you organize a production in such a way that everything arrives just in time, just at the time when you need it. So in that way, you don't have inventories, and in that way you minimize costs for storing. So you're benefiting in 2 ways by organizing production in this way. The first way is that you minimize direct production costs by cheap labor. The second one is you minimize costs by keeping inventories very low. And that gave rise to the term which is called global value chains, which means that you produce everywhere at different places in the world, and you move production everywhere throughout the world until you supply the final product at your, let's say, final place of destination. So this way of production was kind of shocked by COVID-19, because the pandemic revealed all the weaknesses of this way of organizing production. So when in the initial stage of the pandemic, we had this global production interrupted, basically halted at some point in time because of border closures. So borders were closed, and because borders were closed in some countries, then the minimum of movement of goods and people was not able, and because of that, production was also stopped. Then there are also restrictions, not just due to border closures, but also due to lockdowns, closure of some specific, let's say, facilities. Then there were also some other things like restrictions of movements of people or goods in some countries, but also some other pandemic-related stuff, like, for instance, you have spread a surge of cases in some areas, and you need to close factories, facilities because of that way. So basically, the pandemic revealed all the weaknesses of this kind of production, which is very risky and is dependent on everything functioning properly, everything functioning, let's say, perfect. You don't have any shortages, you don't have any stops, you don't have any interruptions. So because the pandemic revealed all the weaknesses of this kind of organizing production globally, global companies started thinking about rearranging this way of production. They started thinking about how they can reorganize their production after the pandemic is over, in order to make it more resilient to shocks such as the pandemic shock that we experienced. And because of that, we started hearing a lot about all kinds of shorings, not just in media, not just in newspapers, but also in academia. So we had like offshoring. Offshoring means that you locate production, you move production out of your home country somewhere else. Then reshoring means you bring production from somewhere abroad to your home country. Then we have far shoring, which means that you locate production far from your home country. Then we have nearshoring, which means you bring production from some other country to a country which is closer to your home country. So this study is basically about nearshoring potentials in the Western Balkans, and today I will speak in general mostly about Eastern Europe. So although these trends gained a lot of attention during this pandemic, they are by no means new. So they're not pretty, but they were around for some time. And I'm showing you now a study which is by Eurofound, which is an agency of the European Union from 2016. This is their annual report, so 5 years ago, which was called Globalization Slowdown. So in this study, Eurofound is saying that there is a globalization slowdown, meaning that there is a slowdown in offshoring, in a movement of production far away from or out of home countries, mostly in Asia, and that this is a product of the increased global uncertainty, but also because the previous decades were exception in the history of the world economy, let's say. They were by no means rule, they were exception because of the integration of China and other Eastern European countries in the global production, let's say, in the global production movements, let's say. So because that was an exceptional period, we had this process of globalization of production. Now that period has ended, and now because of that, we are facing globalization slowdown, which means slowdown in offshoring of companies' production. Then the same organization, several years later, in their annual report from 2019, is noting that there is an upward trend in reshoring, which means bringing production from farther countries, from outside, let's say, to your home country. Still, the number of cases that they note is very small, several hundred or something like that, but still they know that there is an upward trend in this reshoring. So what I'm saying is that this talks about nearshoring, farshoring, reshoring, offshoring have been going on for some time, and people have been talking about globalization slowdown. And it's not just Eurofound, also UNCTAD, which is the United Nations body for trade and investment. They were also speaking about this stuff for some time. So this is their report from 2020, in which they speak basically about the same stuff. So they note a slowdown in international production. And after 2010, basically roughly after the global financial crisis, and they note several reasons for that. So one of the reasons is that you have rising protectionism, which is very relevant. So it's not just other, let's say, economic related stuff, but also political questions, but also some technological developments. Like there is now, we have new technologies which favor asset-light forms of production, like 3D printers and this kind of stuff, which is all pushing towards shorter supply chains and not moving your production away from far from your country. And in the same report, they note that this trend, which has been going on since 2010 roughly, will be reinforced by the current pandemic, or by the COVID pandemic, because like it will be a catalyst to this project. So you had this project of globalization slowdown going on, and now you have a big shock which is pushing in the same direction, and it will basically speed up this process of globalization slowdown. So this is like an intro to the topic, to our research that we are doing. And in that research, we are basically analyzing three questions. We are trying to answer three main questions. The first one is, are there real chances for nearshoring, meaning bringing production from faraway countries to countries close to your home destination? So are there real chances that this will happen, or is it just empty talk? Is it just talk that people do, I don't know, to fill newspapers and to satisfy their curiosity? So this is the first question. The second question is, if there is some chances for nearshoring, can Western Balkans benefit, let's say, from it? So can it happen? Can it be located to Western Balkan countries? And then the third question is, even if the answer to the first two questions is positive, what can Western Balkan economists do in order to benefit most, to benefit fully from all these trends, all these developments? So like I said, the research is on Western Balkans, but I will try to be as general as possible. So we do several concrete aspects, things in the study. So we have descriptive analysis of trends in FDI and related stuff. We then have econometric analysis of determinants of FDI. Then we have a bunch of surveys of German companies who are working abroad, who are investing abroad. Then we have surveys of local companies from the Western Balkans. Then we have interviews with German companies. Then we have case studies of local companies from the Western Balkans. And then we have interviews with investment promotion agencies from the Western Balkans. So I won't be able to present all the things today, but I will try to present the most important ones. So the first finding, let's say, which is very interesting, refers to German companies in general who work abroad. So I'm going to present several surveys here. This is the first survey which has not been done for this project concretely, but we are using it in the project. And it's a survey from October 2020. And it's a survey which includes 3,500 German companies. And one of the questions in that survey was, do you plan changes in your supply chains? And 16% of the German companies, of these 3,500 companies, said that they are planning changes in their production, in their supply chains. And the reasons for these changes are, the first reason is cost optimization, which is okay, not strange. 66% of the companies said that they want to optimize costs. But then the second reason is risk diversification, which is closely related to the ongoing pandemic. The pandemic revealed that this way of organization of production is very risky, and companies now want to address this issue. So 56% of the companies that are planning changes said that the reason why they are planning that is this one, is risk diversification. Then there's another question in the same survey asking companies if they are looking for new locations, and the percentage of companies which said yes, we are looking for new locations is again very high, 12% of these companies. And you can see the reasons here. It's more diverse, but cost optimization, the risk diversification is the third risk, with 36% of the companies choosing this one as a reason why they are looking for new locations. There's another survey, slightly more recent, from March 2021, which is done, which included around 2,400 German companies, And it asks the companies a similar question. So it asks them, do you have problems in your supply chains? And 40%, very high, 40% of the companies which are surveyed said that they are experiencing problems in their supply chains. You can see the regions in which this is most prevalent. Eurozone is the first one. Eurozone is number one. 47% of German companies which work in Eurozone, abroad of Germany, they say that they have problems with their supply chains. China is number two. UK is number three. So it's not only Brexit related, it's broader. It's not just Brexit related. Then there's another question here asking these companies who have supply chains problems, if they are planning changes in their supply chains. So very high, 68% of those who have problems said that they have they plan changes due to their problems. So if you take the full percentage of companies of those 2,400 surveyed companies, how many of them are planning changes? It will be 28% of them are planning changes in their supply chains. And the reasons for the changes are, you can see them on the right hand side here. First of all is new or additional suppliers, then increased warehousing, which is obviously COVID related, then distribute suppliers to several countries, which might be related to nearshoring, then shortening supply routes or supply chains. So you see that there is something, if you speak to German companies in general, you see that there is something going on about this. Then we have another survey, which was a survey of German companies which are planning investing in the Western Balkans. So this is another survey done specifically for our study. And these are companies, German companies, which are thinking about investing in the Western Balkans. And we ask them which factors are most important for them when they decide where to locate their investment. And we included several groups of factors. A higher number here means a higher relevance. So the two most important factors when German companies are choosing location is availability of skilled labor and stability, good governance, and functional institutions. So wages are number three, so they are not, let's say, irrelevant. They are still pretty high on the list. Then we have geographical location, but these two factors are not number one or two. They're slightly, let's say, lower. They're towards the middle of the list. Infrastructure, again, similar to them. And then you can see on the bottom of the list, you have taxes, level of taxes, and the benefits packages that the countries are offering to companies. So these two factors, taxes and benefits packages, are not that relevant for German companies when they decide where to locate abroad. So apart from these surveys, we also did econometric analysis of factors which are important for FDI. And this analysis was done on bilateral FDI, originating from EU countries and OECD countries, and going to countries from Eastern Europe and Asia. And this analysis was done for the period after 2000, so 2001 until 2018. And the results are, I'll show you some of the results now. So one of the most important factors turned out to be education. And I'm showing here how Eastern European countries fare in terms of education compared to the Asian countries. So we can see this is the percentage of STEM graduates. So how much of the total graduates are in STEM, in technical sciences, let's say. And we can see that Eastern European countries are pretty, let's say, worse than Asian countries in this sense. So the best from the Eastern European countries in this regards is Estonia, which has around 29% of graduates from STEM. Then Serbia is also pretty good here with 27%, but they are still far below the best of Asia, or most of Asia actually, which are much above 30%, and some even go to 40% of the graduates. So in terms of education, which turns out to be a very important factor for FDI, Eastern European countries are not very strong. Then the second reason which turned out to be very important is governance, widely defined, which includes also political stability, functional institutions, this kind of stuff, control of corruption, and this kind of stuff. So we can see also here that Eastern European, the best of the Eastern European countries in this regard is again Estonia, which has index number of 1.2, but it's again much worse than the best Asian countries. And you can see that the other Eastern European countries are worse than that. So again, when it comes to governance, Eastern European countries are not so strong as Asian countries. Then the third factor, which turned out to be important for FDI, is infrastructure, quality of infrastructure. And here again, Eastern Europe is worse than Asian countries. And you can see Estonia again is the best one, but it's still much worse than most of the Asian countries. Okay, you might argue this is here you cannot compare Eastern Europe to Asia because Eastern Europe is geographically much more closer to Western Europe than Asia. Okay, maybe. I'm not saying no, but still, if you look at the quality of infrastructure, Eastern Europe has a lot to do compared to, let's say, other regions in the world. And then the last factor that I'm showing is taxes. Taxes turned out to be important just in the long run, not in the short run, which we explain through the notion that these countries, Eastern European countries, usually give generous benefits packages, meaning they give tax holidays to foreign investors. And because of that, taxes are not important factor in the short run. But we see here that in terms of taxes, Eastern European countries are have higher taxes, let's say, than Asian countries. You see the country with the lowest labor taxes here is Romania, which is kind of sizably has higher taxes than other Asian countries. Interestingly, wages turned out to be not statistically significant in the analysis, which we don't read as the wages are irrelevant for FDI, but we read in the sense that all these countries, both Eastern European countries and Asian countries, have wages which are sizably lower than wages in the Western European countries. Because of that, they are not the driving force, they are not the edge, the factor which gives edge of one country over another country. So when the investor is deciding between two countries, let's say one in Asia, one in Eastern Europe, he says both of them have low labor costs, low wages. So that's why that's not the main reason why I'll choose one out of the two. I have some other reasons like stability, governance, and that kind of stuff. So this is the econometric analysis, which basically says that Eastern Europe has a lot of work to do if it wants to catch up or to get close to Asia, not just in this nearshoring story, but in general, in terms of about investment and other related questions. Now I'll go shortly to the Western Balkans specifically, just to see how things are, to show how things are there. So Western Balkans were a specific case here because for them in the last decade or something, FDI were a top priority, top economic priority. All the Western Balkan countries, meaning the six Western Balkan countries, Albania, Bosnia, Montenegro, Kosovo, North Macedonia, and Serbia. So all of them had special state agencies dedicated to attracting foreign direct investment promotion agencies. Some of them even had ministers or ministries who were dedicated to attracting foreign direct investment. And all of them provided very generous benefits packages to foreign investors who would come and invest in their countries. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them even had specific technological zones or economic zones where foreign investors could easily open a facility often without paying any costs for communalities or whatever. So they could easily start a business in these zones, and these zones were usually with a good location and connected with everything that's needed for that. So not all of them, but most of the countries had even these zones. So basically, Western Balkan countries were trying to do everything in the last decade or even more in order to attract FDI. And some of them were successful in that. You have to admit that some of them were successful in that. So if you look the FDI inflows in the whole region of Eastern Europe as a share of GDP in the last decade, you can see that the top three countries are Western Balkan countries. Montenegro had 12% of GDP FDI during this decade, which is really, really high. Albania was the second one with around 8% of FDI, again, very high. Serbia had around 6% of FDI every year, which is very, very high. Then had Estonia in between, and then Kosovo with 5% of GDP. So these countries were successful, admittedly. This strategy, aggressive strategy, let's say, of trying to attract investors in their countries was successful for them. But then again, you had some other countries like North Macedonia and Bosnia, which had 2 to 3% of FDI, like most of the other Eastern European countries. So apart from all the efforts that they were doing, they didn't turn out to be very successful in attracting FDI. So that's, let's say, one general introduction to the story. Another descriptive, let's say, statistics about FDI in these countries is to look at the countries from where most of the FDI comes from. And in this decade, most of the FDI in the region came from Netherlands, around 5 billion euros. Then we had Switzerland at the second place. Then Austria is the third biggest investor in the Western Balkans. Then Russia, and then Germany. So these 5 countries, Netherlands, Switzerland, Austria, Russia, and Germany, are the top 5 investors in the Western Balkans. So this is like an introduction, general information about FDI in the Western Balkans. We had a survey on German investors which have invested in the Western Balkans. So these are companies which are already present in the Western Balkans. And we asked them, so why did your company choose to invest in the Western Balkans and not in some other place? So the 3 main reasons they chose were, first, low wages, then geographic location, and then educated workforce. So these were the 3 most important reasons why German investors have chosen Western Balkan countries as their destination. And just to illustrate, we had interviews with some of these companies, just to illustrate these findings, to basically strengthen these findings. So there's a quotation from a company working in North Macedonia about the location. So they say, we can load the truck here on Friday afternoon, and it will be in the parent plant on Monday, or even with the customer. So you could never do anything like that from Morocco. So basically they say that location is good. There's another very interesting quotation from a company located in Bosnia. So it says, when it comes to geographic location, Bosnia is even better than Bulgaria because it's around 500 kilometers closer than Sofia, than Bulgaria. And there are another quotes about the quality of the labor force. So what really impressed me was how honest and hardworking people are. This is a company from Bosnia and Herzegovina. There's another quotation from Albania. People are flexible, they can learn fast, something like that. Then I have another one from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Then this is about the importance of the wages. So they say, for sure, this is and will be for a while a low labor cost country, which will continue to be a competitive advantage of the country compared to other countries for some time in the future. So basically this confirms that wages are important, and that in terms of wages, these countries will remain to be competitive in the years to come. This thing will not change drastically in the coming years. There are also other quotations, but let's go to this other stuff. There's a question, very important question in the survey about the negative sides of the Western Balkans. So we asked companies which have invested already in the Balkans, what are the negative sides in the Balkans? And the 3 main things that they note are, first, poor governance and institutions. Then second, the government doesn't provide enough support. And then the third one, availability of skilled workforce. I'll illustrate this with some quotations just to illustrate better the findings. So in terms of governance, what they say is that the most important thing is political stability. They don't like dramas, and this is a quotation. So there are no dramas like in Hungary, no dramas like in Ukraine. So they want political stability. And they also say that this is often a negative side in the Balkans because of the history of political instability, wars, conflicts, and things like that. But then also they note that they didn't have, so when they say they didn't have enough support from the government, they don't mean the top level government like the prime minister of the government, but they mean the institutions, the way the state institutions work. So you have a problem with functioning institutions in the Balkans. Because of that, companies often have trouble. So this is one quotation which says that a company that was working in Bosnia and Herzegovina was complaining that they had problems with the institutions, not with top-level government, but with the institutions. The last very important finding is about the skilled labor force, availability of skilled labor force. So companies are complaining that they can't find enough skilled labor force in the Balkans, in the sense that there is labor force, but it's not skilled, it's not educated. The quality of the labor force is not so high. So they have to train their workers before they start working for the company. So you can't just take workers from that have finished education and put them to work in your company, but you have to provide training. And companies are complaining about this, meaning that the educational system in the countries is not so good as it should be. Coming back to the finding from the econometric analysis. So this is the last point that I want to show from the survey. And this is about the cooperation between German foreign companies or German companies which have invested in the Balkans and local companies. So we asked, this is a survey of local companies from the Western Balkans. We asked them how much of them, how many of them cooperate already with foreign investors. And more than half of them, 55% of the surveyed companies, said that they already cooperate with foreign investors which work in their country, which is not great, but certainly not terrible. More than half of the companies already work with foreign companies which are in their countries. And the share of turnover that they have with foreign companies is slightly more than 1/3, so 35%. Then we ask them, in which way you cooperate with foreign companies? And this is most of the companies, 3/4 of the companies, cooperate either by selling to foreign companies or by buying from them. You see these two chunks in this pie, they are around 3/4 of the whole pie. But then we ask them in which ways you want to cooperate. And then what's interesting to see is that the preferred ways of cooperation are not just selling and buying. If you take selling and buying, they give less than 1/2 of the whole answer. So more than 1/2 of the ways of cooperating with foreign companies are these other forms of cooperation, which we call softer form of cooperations, like lobbying together, sharing information, developing products together, and things like that. So this is a very important finding because it's one big story about these investors and global supply chains is how to integrate local producers into these global supply chains, how to make them cooperate more with foreign companies. But cooperation doesn't, and usually people, when they talk about cooperation, they mean how we can make local companies produce or sell to foreign companies which are in our country. But it's not just that. It's more than just making your companies sell to foreign companies. You have to find ways to to expand this cooperation to other directions, to other avenues, not just buying and selling, but also these softer forms of cooperation, like technological spillovers, knowledge exchange, etc. And I'm finishing now with the presentation. So the main takeaways from the study would be, first, is there potential for, so globalization slowdown was, let's say, present, was a phenomenon even before COVID-19. People were talking about that, international institutions, not just people, and it is likely to speed up after COVID. COVID is likely to act as a catalyst to this process of globalization slowdown. High share of German companies which are operating internationally said that they are thinking about supply chains changes. So it's not just an artifact, it's really companies are thinking about this. Major reasons for their thinking or about changes in their supply chains are shorter delivery times, better value for money, and risk diversification. Very important, risk diversification. Eastern European countries come as a first natural choice when companies from Western Europe think about nearshoring or bringing production from, let's say, Asia or far countries, somewhere closer to Western Europe. Why? Because first, they are geographically very close to Western Europe. Second, they have, it's a culturally similar region, so they have knowledge about the region. And third, wages are still low in Eastern Europe and will remain low, at least compared to Western European standards, for some time. So wages in Eastern Europe will not reach Western European levels for some time in the future. That will make these countries, that will continue making these countries attractive for foreign investors coming from Western Europe. Then again, factors which will be crucial in the next period for attracting investors will be skilled labor force and good governance and functional institutions. So the story of foreign investment and FDI in the next period will move from low costs to high quality. So low costs will not be the driving, let's say, reason, the main reason for FDI in the coming period, but high quality will become more important than low costs. And this is something that everybody has to understand if they want to benefit from these, let's say, trends in the coming years. Eastern European countries, historically speaking, not just Western Balkans, but in general, Eastern European countries, in the previous decades, were relying too much, maybe not too much, but they were relying first and foremost on low costs when attracting FDI, much more than they were relying on high quality. So this has to be changed. This has to change if they want to benefit fully from possible new trends after COVID in terms of FDI, because the driver of the FDI in the post-COVID period will be high quality, not so much low cost. What do we mean by high quality? Three things, first and foremost: education, governance, and infrastructure. So investment and improvement in all of these three, because they are weak sides of the region. And this study shows that they are very important for FDI historically, but also in the coming period. Additional factor is you shouldn't think just about attracting companies to your country, but you should think about how to benefit most from their presence in your country, which means how your local companies can, not just local companies, but local actors can benefit from this. And what's very important here is to improve the cooperation between domestic and local companies, which doesn't mean just selling to foreign companies, but also means knowledge exchange, technological spillovers, and things like that. And to sum up, to close the story, coming back to the title of the spring seminar, which is Brave New World. Brave New World is an ironical phrase, of course, but the new world can indeed be brave for Eastern European countries. So not just ironically, but it can indeed be brave if, but only if, Eastern European countries are able and willing to change as the world is changing. So that's all from me. And now looking forward to your questions.
Branimir, thanks a lot. Yeah, I would like to invite the audience to write their questions, comments into the chat. I have a few questions myself. Maybe I would just like to start. Well, so we see that nearshoring, both to the Western Balkans, but probably to all of Eastern Europe, is an option for many companies. But are there already some first signs that this is already happening?
Yeah, so we had these interviews with investment promotion agencies for this study, and with 6 investment promotion agencies, one from each of the countries. And several of them said that they already see something like this. So they see increased interest from foreign companies for investing in their countries. So it's very hard to say that you already have, let's say, increased presence of foreign investors in your country, but at least they see increased interest. So that's why one of the points of this study and my presentation today is that there is potential for that, but how it will turn out does not depend only on outside factors, does not only depend on the world and global companies, but also depends on local governments. So local governments can benefit from this if they act, but they don't have to. If they don't do anything, if they don't act and they don't change, they will not benefit from it. So yes, there is an interest for this, but what will turn out is depends on what will governments do.
Thanks. Both Andrea Eltetö and Georg Rauchenberg have been mentioning the high share of Dutch FDI and the remark that these foreign direct investments are not necessarily of Dutch origin because of taxation issues. And I think it is well taken that not only, as Georg Rauchenberg says, the German companies would go via the Netherlands or Switzerland. As far as we know, I think a lot of US companies are taking also the route via the Netherlands and investing in the region. So if I remember correctly, Coca-Cola would be also a case in point. Let me maybe also go to the first question of Andrea Eltetö, where she mentions that the poor governance and corruption might be maybe problematic for German investors, but maybe not necessarily for Chinese ones. I don't know whether we can really confirm that, is China's role is increasing in the Western Balkans, as in not necessarily maybe as an investor in productive capital yet, but it's increasing.
Yeah, sure, but still China is very small in terms of FDI in the region. So I would agree in general with this, but I also have to say that one of the interesting findings about corruption in the region is that foreign companies seem not to be affected so much by corruption because they are shielded from it, because they don't work with local actors, they don't sell to the government, they don't work with local companies, but they usually import and export. So because of that, they are not directly affected by corruption, and they have this like preferential treatment, like you work in the zones, nobody can touch you. If you have some problems, you can call, I don't know, the prime minister, these things like that. So they are, this petty corruption does not affect them to a great extent. What's more important in terms of government effectiveness and institutions are these other factors. So it's not just corruption, but these other things like political stability, government effectiveness. Government is often ineffective, even though it wants to help, let's say, investors, it's ineffective. It doesn't do that. You have institutions which do not work. So even though you have like, I don't know, positive attitude of politicians and the prime minister, then you have institutions which don't deliver that. So these aspects are more important than corruption itself.
Okay, there is a fairly specific question by Claire. She would like to know whether we expect the current trends in nearshoring to affect also the garment production in the Western Balkans and wider Southeastern and Central and Eastern Europe.
Yeah, so I think that garment is not very different from the other sectors, meaning that, yeah, there is potential for that in the region, maybe greater potential than other sectors because the region has a history in textiles and clothing. But then on the other hand, there are many problems in this area because this sector has been technologically very disadvantaged or backward in recent years. So there have not been technological investments in new technology in recent years, which is a big obstacle for, let's say, a nearshoring in this industry. But yeah, definitely there is a potential for nearshoring in garments. But in order for the countries, let's say, if we want to see that, whether we will see that or not will depend whether we will have changes in this regard. And the change which is needed here is investment in new technologies, because the companies that are working already in that area in the Balkans are still technologically backward and cannot deliver what is requested from them, let's say, from the Western European partners.
Mm-hmm. Maria Hacke has a question regarding, well, it's not only the skill issues, but a major factor is also not only in the Western Balkans, but also Romania and Bulgaria, the unfavorable demographic situation, basically a history of mass migration. So in your view, what would that mean for the future integration of these countries' industries into the global value chains?
So definitely that's an obstacle, that's a potential problem, because first of all, you have less and less people who are able to work. You don't have enough labor force, and already some of the companies, even some of the companies that we surveyed or interviewed in this analysis, said that they see maybe not right now, but in some future, in near future, problems, potential problems with this, that you won't have enough labor because people are leaving the country. So that's definitely now one issue. Another issue is that you also have educated people leaving the country, which means that you won't have, even if you want to go, I don't know, to move to higher technology or higher value added segments of production, you won't have people to do that because educated people are moving out of the countries. But then again, I would say that there's also, there can be also some positive trends, or maybe not trends, but developments here. And we had this study which came out maybe 1 month ago. I think Sandra Leitner was from the institute which did this study, which basically analyzed new trends in movements, developments, whatever, in migration in the Western Balkans. And it found that some of the countries have actually experienced brain gain. So it's not just brain drain, but also brain gain, meaning that you have educated people. So on average, all the countries have net emigration, so people moving out of the countries. But if you look at the educational, let's say, distribution of these movements, some of the countries have educated people, more educated people are coming back to their countries than are leaving their countries. So this is for Serbia, this was found for Serbia, Montenegro, and North Macedonia. So how do you, and this is a so-called brain gain. So how do you explain this? You explain that you have young people going abroad to study, and they gain education, and they come back to their country. So that's kind of a brain gain. So it's not everything. It's not all so dark, let's say, so negative, but it's not also rosy, because the question now is, what do you do with these people? So you have educated people coming back to your country, but are these countries able to integrate these people, or to make the most of these people when they come back to their country, or they leave them again to live abroad? So the story is complicated. It's not simple. You can't say yes or no. There are many, let's say, aspects of the story, but definitely migration and demographic changes are an issue, and people, everybody should think carefully about them.
So you are basically you're rather positive about the policy option of education. You also mentioned it in your summary, because I mean there was a long discussion many years ago that well, why should the countries invest in education when the educated people immediately leave the country after the end of their education? And there is something to this argument, I guess, as well. But then again, you can't just stop financing education. Which areas, what type of education would you argue would be particularly beneficial for these countries?
Yes, so the first thing to note is that at least Western Balkan countries, I guess in general Eastern European as well, but Western Balkans in particular, they spend very not enough, let's say, on education. If you look the average value of government expenditure on education, it's around 4% of something of GDP, which is much lower than the average for EU, which is around 6% of GDP. So the first thing to understand is that governments must spend more on education. But then the second important thing is, how do you spend more? On which aspects do you spend more? And this study had many questions about this. So the first, I also showed this in the econometric analysis. So the first aspect that turns out to be very important is this STEM education, basically technical education, mathematics, technical sciences, this kind of stuff. That turns out to be the most important for attracting FDI. Why? Because most of these companies that invest in the region are companies from manufacturing, technology, this kind of industry. So they need engineers, and they need educated workers. So if you want to attract good companies, let's say, good companies from, I don't know, automotive industry, or maybe, I don't know, airplanes and this kind of stuff, you need to have good engineers. So that's why governments should invest in STEM education. That's the first thing. And the second thing is vocational education. So not just university, not just engineers, but also highly qualified workers, highly qualified laborers. Meaning that you also need people, quality workers, which will produce, which will do the manufacturing. And what's very important here is that there is a cooperation between companies and the schools. The secondary schools, which should provide vocational education, they must cooperate more with companies who do this. So that's another finding from the study. We have this from several sources there. So these are the two main concrete aspects. So first, STEM education, engineers, and second, the improvement of vocational education through making them more practical, better cooperation with companies and things like that. And of course, on top of all that, more spending by the government.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking about unfavorable demographics, if I remember correctly, particularly Southeastern Europe has still a potential, for instance, for a higher female labor force participation. So there is still also a fairly large chunk of subsistence farming. So, I mean, there are certain pockets of potentials for increasing employment numbers, I guess, still available in our region, also with higher levels of unemployment as compared to, for instance, I don't know, the Czech Republic, which before the crisis had unemployment rates. We basically had no unemployment, maybe unemployment rates of 1.5% to 2%. So basically full employment. So that's still different in Southeastern Europe.
Yeah, definitely, there is space in let's say in the Western Balkans for that. But you also have cultural obstacles which are very hard to break. So it's not just you will do policies for activating people and everything will work. It's much more complicated because you have cultural reasons which say that women shouldn't work, women should stay at home. Even whatever the government tries to do, let's say by direct active labor market policies, they might not prove effective because of these cultural reasons. So it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do anything about it. It just means that you should frame or maybe change the strategy by making it not just pure economics, like active labor market policies, but also include cultural reasons there, general education of people, changing the norms and understandings of the people. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is that even if you do this, the question is, let's say you make your people more active, but what can they do? Can they can maybe be ordinary workers in, I don't know, in factory, basic workers, unskilled work maybe, but can they provide work which is, I know, required for high technology companies? They cannot do it immediately. So that's why it basically comes back to the question of education. That's why you also, let's say, activating policies of labor market will not be enough, but you also have to have, they have to be accompanied by improving the education so that you don't have just cheap labor or, I don't know, unskilled workers, but you have higher skilled workers.
Okay, thank you very much. There is another question by Georg Rauchenberg. Is a structured dual education an issue in the Western Balkans additionally to contacts with companies? That is to say, an officially recognized way of education.
So I'm not sure. Dual education is an issue in general in the Western Balkans. I'm not sure that the official recognition is a problem. I'm not sure. I can't say too much about that. In some countries, I guess it is. So in the analysis that we did, I remember that from Kosovo, they were saying that this is a problem in Kosovo. They have dual education is not recognized by everybody. It's not generally recognized, universally recognized. So because of that, they consider it to be a problem in Kosovo, but I'm not sure about the other countries. So I'm not sure that the recognition of vocational education is a problem, but dual education is definitely an issue and it should be improved.
Yes, I mean, there are also projects involving also Austrian companies, if I remember correctly, in the wider region, being involved in this type of dual education schemes.